I've tried all kinds of sports: volleyball, basketball, soccer, and the only one to cause me injury, the only one that fractured my incredibly sturdy bones and causes me to ache and rub said bone when the barometric pressure drops, is a sport that is supposed to be the safest. It's the sport they prescribe to old men when they get too old to run or ski: swimming. Early on, one of the cool seniors on our team gave me the nickname Tidal Wave. When I flew over the starting blocks for the 100-meter backstroke, there was a wake that crested into the other lanes and sloshed over the edge of the pool. It was meant to be an insult. I was a fat, strong swimmer, and I pretended I didn't care that the nickname was an insult, that it wasn't a constant reminder that I was the largest girl on the team, that every year when we ordered our Speedos, I wasn't the girl who whispered the largest size and prayed it fit. But it was the first nickname that didn't reference my body directly, so I just went with it. There was an evolutionary theory that gave me some comfort. It centered around the idea of the aquatic ape. The theory is that's why we're so hairless compared to the apes of the African plains, that our fat stores appear more like mammals of the ocean than mammals of the land. And it's true, I look more like a svelte manatee in the water than a muscled orangutan. I was good at swimming. My body fat gave me buoyancy that let me live in the water, float with minimal effort, and glide closer to the top of the surface for a more productive stroke. But that's not why I love swimming. Swimming was individual. I'd been on the volleyball team and the tennis team, and I was good at neither, which made my teammates loathe me, sighing when I got rotated in, rolling their eyes when I missed a serve, and loudly asking the coach why she just couldn't kick me off. And I didn't get red-faced or sweaty when swimming. Well, I did, but I was underwater in the pool, so I didn't feel like I was on display for anyone to judge my enthusiastic athleticism. The swim team at New Richmond High School was a weird team. With the exception of a couple cool kids, we were a team of nerds. So nerdy was our team that we had to compare science Olympiad, academic team, debate club schedules, just to make sure our swim team meets didn't conflict. I can't say if that's true of other swim teams or if it's just a product of our coach, our nerd leader and biology teacher, Jim Crozier. Crozier was my favorite teacher. In rural Ohio, the discussion of evolution was always accompanied with an in-depth religious questioning from his students. I was agnostic, and I wanted to grow up to be an evolutionary biologist, and if that wasn't bad enough, I was incredibly outspoken about it. Crozier was my lighthouse in a sea of creationists. Crozier and I bonded over a woman scientist in our biology book, Candace Pert. She obsessed over her experiments like they were children, and the other students in the class mocked the woman in the book. Like a baby, something in a petri dish, that lady didn't have a life. I argued fervently that this wasn't so absurd. Come on, think about it. All that time she invested in her experiment, all the time she worked late in the lab, it was like a child. Crozier and I met eyes and sighed. Crozier ran his practices like a tight ship. Practice went up on the whiteboard: 500 warm-up, 50-yard sprints, free, back, breast, butterfly, 30 seconds rest between each set, 4 sets of 100. Practice was hard. I never missed. I never wanted to. I loved being in the water and the challenge of keeping up with my team. I was dedicated. But Crozier always gave the team an opportunity to earn a way out. An Olympic-sized swimming pool has a set of flags that go across the ends of the pool, close to the edge. They're my flags, backstroke flags. If you're a competitive backstroker, you've done the math on how many exact strokes it takes you from the time that you pass under those flags to the wall. And if you're amped on adrenaline, flailing to catch up with the person in the lane next to you, you'll hit that exact number and your hand will be out, grasping for that cold tile wall, and you'll kick and kick with your hand out, and you will be pissed for fucking up the turn. But if your stroke is strong, you're focused, you'll only need the exact number of strokes. And on that last strike, your hand will come out and you'll hold your breath for just a moment, waiting, and then you'll feel the tile and flip yourself, torpedoing in the other direction in a matter of a second or two. Each practice started the same. We gathered by the shallow end of the pool, we threw our goggles high in the air, and tried to get them to hang on the backstroke flags. We could never get them to catch. We complained it was impossible, but without even hesitating, Crozier could just do it. And if you caught the goggles on the flags, you got out of practice. Simple. I'd been on the team since middle school. I'd been on Crozier's team for 3 years. I had never seen it happen. Never. It was more of a ritual than a game. I was goofing off on the pool deck with my other teammates, waiting for the stragglers to arrive. A few tossed their goggles towards the backstroke flags and then dove in to retrieve them as they inevitably missed the line. I tossed my goggles and they caught. They caught? Hung, suspended in space, dancing like a fish on a line. My teammates cheered. Crozier curtly nodded, and I, being a choir nerd as well as those other nerds, burst into Hallelujah Chorus. I danced along the pool deck, and my teammate grabbed my goggles off the line and tossed them to me, still singing, still dancing. I leaned towards the water to catch them, and I slipped. I was underwater before I knew what happened. My foot stepped off the edge of the pool, and while the other stayed on the pool deck, the sudden lack of support meant gravity pulled me, and I fell hard, fast, and directly on my cunt. I suppose technically it's called a pubis bone. If you're a woman and you've ridden a boy's bike as a child and accidentally slipped and smacked your lady parts on that straight bar, you know. It takes your breath away. It makes your soul curl up so tightly it gets a Charlie horse, and you make a sound that isn't unlike when a man gets kicked in the crotch. And this was happening underwater. I held my breath and contemplated my choices. I stayed underwater. I might have let out a scream, but I didn't surface. I waited for the first couple waves of pain to subside, and I decided I wasn't going to let anyone know. I was smart enough to know in that moment, if people knew, I would always be the fat girl who slipped off the edge of the pool and broke her vagina. I stood up. A teammate asked me if I was okay, and I smiled and said, sure. And then I walked to the phone by the pool, and I called my mother. Can you come pick me up? She heard something in my voice because she didn't ask me any questions. She just told me she was on her way. The locker room was empty. I slipped out of my suit slowly, dying, trying not to whimper as I pulled on my dry clothes. My hair hung in sopping wet strands because I could not muster the movement to towel dry it. When my mother's car pulled up, I sank into the front street. I can't sit. I burst into sobbing tears. My mother was an RN, and although compassionate, I was used to her clinical side that was a mom and a nurse at the same time. She laid me on the couch and took a look, and I stared at the ceiling, too much in pain to be embarrassed. She clucked her tongue, gave me a gentle pat on the knee. It's swollen. Let me get you some ibuprofen and an ice pack. I laid on the couch for 2 days, an ice pack giving my labia frostbite. My father wouldn't even make eye contact with me. I can't blame him. His sports injury advice in this point of my life had been walk it off. And if you're not bleeding, it's fine. And even if he did meet my eyes, I'm not sure what I would have said. You should see the other guy. When my vagina turned so black and blue that my mother second-guessed her initial diagnosis, she announced that I was going to the ER. The ER doc added a whole nother layer of humiliation and pain. The doctor, of course a man, after asking me about my sexual history, I was a virgin. Probably not anymore, my mom said. The doctor decided he wouldn't do a vaginal exam, but instead did a quick and dirty anal exam and told my mother it was likely I fractured my pubis bone. Here's the thing. You can't put a cast on your vagina. You have to live with a broken pussy. The worst part of the ER visit is they billed my parents for it. Non-emergency ER visit, $500 broken cunt bill. I laid on the couch for a week. I couldn't go to school. I couldn't sit up. On Friday, the phone rang. My mother answered it and called me into the kitchen. I walked stiff-legged over to the phone. Hello? Hey, Jess, it's Crozier. You haven't been at practice. You sick? My face immediately turned red again. My ears were on fire. I held my breath. I contemplated my choices. I decided it was Crozier. He's my coach, and he was a scientist. I could trust him to understand. No, remember when I got out of practice on Monday and I slipped? Well, one leg went one way and the other, and I smacked my vagina, my pelvic bone on the edge of the pool. I can't sit. I have contusions, black and blue, but it's getting better. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Jessica? Yes, Crozier? When you come back to school, tell a different story than that. Don't tell anyone that story. Good idea, Crozier. Crozier never spoke about that phone call. He had me in class for the rest of the year, in 2 classes the following year, and at swim practice every week. When I asked Crozier to sign my junior yearbook, he could have signed it anything, teased me, made a private joke, but instead he recalled the day in class when I defended that scientist and that moment that passed between us where, despite being decades apart, we felt like peers for just an instant. He wrote, "Remember the philosophy that you and I understood. Some others were out to lunch." Pelvic fractures take about 12 weeks to heal. I vowed to never play the goggle toss game again, and despite the pain, I was back in the pool the next week. For more than a decade, when a storm was coming, my cunt ached. I worried slightly the first time I had sex that someone would notice. And later, during the pangs of childbirth, I vaguely wondered if I would re-break my pubis. Same diff. And I took Crozier's advice and never told anyone.